Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining another episode of the PM Learning Series. Really excited to have you all here today. My name is Shivi. I'm the host for the show. And please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. As many of you know, the PM Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and product practitioners share their product building journeys, as well as lessons learned along the way to inspire current and aspiring PMs like you to level up your product career. And some of you might have followed us in the past 2 months. We started a special series featuring product builders from leading generative AI companies, both startups and established companies, exploring the challenges and opportunities of this very transformative technology, and then really gaining insights from those leading the charge in generative AI product development from the forefront. So please make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, which you can find the link in the events details tab to receive key takeaways from today's event, as well as future event updates. Also, today we have two very special speakers who have prepared a very special set of free resource guides and freebies, a lot of things that you can continue your learning journey beyond today's masterclass. And so make sure you subscribe so that you get links to unlock those resources for free. Now, without further ado, let me bring up the guests to the stream. Let me introduce them one to one. So, Polly, welcome to the stream. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Polly has about 20 years in tech, spanning software engineering, large natural language search, predictive analytics, and most recently being the product management leader at Alexa AI, where she led the team that launched the first generative AI answer on Alexa in 2020. That's very exciting, Polly. I didn't know what Gen AI was back in the days. So you're definitely the in the leading front for this. You're now the CEO and founder of AI Career Boost, dedicated to increasing diversity in AI leadership and access to careers in AI. So really excited to have you. I knew you and Rupa in a moment. I'll introduce her through the Maven course. And I know that you two have been doing a really good job there, as well as with your Reforge course. So really excited today to get sort of a sneak peek of a mini lecture from both of you. And of course, without further ado, let me also introduce Rupa. Hey, Rupa.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. So Rupa is a seasoned professional with over 15 years of experience in tech, working at companies at Amazon, Google, Uber, and unicorn startups. Throughout her career, she has focused on designing products and emerging technologies, including computer vision, AI, ML, AR, VR, conversational voice interfaces. Rupa, I feel like I just said some of the most exciting buzzwords about like cutting edge AI technology, and you definitely have worked in a lot of this domain. So we have a lot to learn from you. You are currently the head of merchants and ads design at Uber, and you're also a lecturer at Stanford. So really honored to have you here today.
Super excited to be here as well.
All right. Without further ado, I think we should dive in. So today, we're very honored to have you two to talk about a very interesting case study or space about building conversational AI products. I think Polly and Rupa, I know that you prepare a set of slides to do a mini masterclass. I think something that's been very top of my mind as we were thinking about a lot of this is how people have been discussing about user interface is going to change from this tab search focus interface to really become more conversational and more chatbot based. Is that the right approach to think about product design? Like, what are some of the implications, design principles that we should really embrace as we going into the session and looking at kind of your masterclass? Obviously, we'll dive in a lot more throughout our Q&A session after this initial lecture. And for folks, if you have questions for Polly or Rupa, feel free to, again, introduce yourself, drop them in the chat. And from time to time, we might pick them out as part of the newsletter response. And please, without further ado, let's start with your mini lecture.
Sure. We're going to address exactly those questions you were asking about, Chivi. we wanted to chat today about conversational AI and some of the lessons we learned. Both Rupa and I worked together at Alexa in our time there. I was on the product side, and she was on there as a design leader. So I think it's exciting to look back at how far we've come. Alexa was one of the first tools that introduced conversational AI to the world at scale, and now we're seeing, the emergence of large language models. What does this mean in terms of conversational AI interfaces? So my name is Polly. Thank you for the warm introduction, Chavi. And I wanted, Rupa, did you want to say a word or two of introduction as well?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us on this program. And I look forward to this session and connecting with anyone if you have questions. Awesome. So I'm going to take a minute just to give you a sample of what we have done in the past. As Polly mentioned, we worked together at our tenure at Amazon, where we worked on voice interfaces. So our charter was basically helping our users get access to inspiration, product research, Q&A answers, and a whole bunch of shopping related capabilities using AI. So one modality that we worked on very often was voice interfaces. It was one of the most widely adopted devices featuring Alexa, and there was no screen, so we had to define interfaces that were purely voice based, very different paradigm from chat based interfaces. We also launched the first chatbot using Alexa on the Amazon mobile app as well. And we launched several multimodal experiences, which was a combination of voice and chat based modality. It was actually voice and screen based modality where you had to design interfaces that could take any of those inputs and both at the same time. Pretty complex way to design a user experience. And finally, we also dabbled into the area of visual AI or computer vision, as they call it, very early days, almost about a decade ago, where I was working with startups trying to take visual input to be able to find products that had similar visual attributes. I think fast forward 10 years, we see a lot of these applications in Google Lens right now. But that's basically a quick overview of the kind of work we've done in the past, and happy to address any questions around these.
So we wanted to start by defining conversational AI. There is some confusion about what's the difference with generative AI. And conversational AI can be enabled by generative AI, but it is a form of AI that enables machines to engage in natural human-like conversations, right? We're thinking multi-turn, conversational interfaces by voice or by text. So they're a little different than co-pilots, things where we're using traditional UX methods like drop-down lists and things like that. So it's kind of an interaction of like the AI, generative AI and a particular UX style. And conversational AI is hardly new. I'm sure you're aware it goes way back to 1950s. One of the first chatbots ever was actually in the 1960s, Eliza. We're not going to go through the whole timeline here, but obviously ChatGPT has sparked a huge Cambrian explosion in the interest in chatbot and conversational AI. I want to point out in 2014, our little friend Alexa emerging here in that sort of era of voice assistance. So again, it's been almost a decade since we've been using these, but there seems to be something different in the way users are adopting and really taking to chat in particular via conversational AI. But you'd asked at the beginning, like, should we be applying conversational AI, Kai, as we call it here, to everything? Is that just the most natural way for people to interact? And we have some lessons from Alexa proving that isn't necessarily always the case, right? You do have to think about, is this a conversational experience really going to deliver a 10x improvement that will actually lead to people adopting it, right? And I think too few people are taking that into consideration right now and just putting chatbots on the roadmap instead of delving deeper into some of the other possibilities with generative AI. I think it's important to look at, like, what are your alternatives to conversational AI right now? Are you replacing human interaction? There may be some things currently really high value to customers in a human interaction, right? The context that they have about the world, which you may or may not be able to replace with a prompt. But that trust and relationship, even confidentiality, some areas users might really react poorly to interacting with an AI. And it's important to maintain that transparency about what you're doing in your systems, just for ethical reasons, right? The other place where we're seeing conversational AI come in, as opposed to replacing human interaction, is replacing traditional CX. So if you have something right now your software is doing via a form, drop-down list, traditional UX elements, often those interfaces can be really familiar, really fast, they're reliable, they're repeatable. So if users highly value that in the situation, replacing them with a conversational AI may not be your best path in every case, right? The key here really is, are you asking your users to change their behavior? And I think a lot of us underestimate how hard that can be, right, Rupa?
Absolutely. I think that is one of the biggest lessons we learned at our time at Alexa is you would assume that human to human conversation is so natural and intuitive, and which is why Alexa introduced the idea of speaking to a smart device. But if you are used to doing things a certain way, for example, all of us love to sit on our laptops, cozy up in a couch and do shopping and open up a million tabs and just go back and forth, making sure that we're addressing our sense of FOMO, checking everything out there before we narrow something down. But with Alexa, you have to go back and forth multiple times till you get to a few different options to choose from. That change in behavior is extremely hard, and that's something to keep in mind even before you get started on your project. So let's dig deeper into the shopping use case, for example. Everyone knows the typical e-commerce or shopping funnel. You start with top of the funnel, which is generally measured in terms of success criteria as engagement metrics, right? The user expectation at that point is, I'm looking for inspiration, I'm looking for what's out there, I'd like to be delighted and discover something that I never thought I wanted. Instagram does that extremely well. I want to research and make sure that I understand, is this the right product for me? So you're basically evaluating fitment at that point and ensuring that the information that you're getting is from a trusted source. So Oprah's Favorite Things or Wired magazine, these became very popular for certain types of product research and discovery. It's because folks started trusting these sources. Now, how do you replicate this in the context of Alexa? Making sure that we understand these user expectations. And not every product was suitable for these type of experiences. Now, fast forward down the funnel to what we call bottom of the funnel, which is generally measured on conversion. This point, the user is not looking for a lot of different options and browsing. They're looking for, I need something very specific. I kind of know what I'm looking for. It just needs to work for me. So my size, my price point, etc. I want to do quick Q&A to understand, is this going to work with XYZ? Is it going to show up on, on this date? So very quick, decision-making process at this stage. Most likely reordering, because I don't want to waste time going back and forth with a smart device. I just want to say, I just ordered milk yesterday, can you reorder it? Those became very popular and very, very successful use cases with a voice based device, right? And finally, we learned that attaching some shopping tips and ideas to delivery notifications, which was a very popular behavior and use case for Alexa, was also successful. So again, just using the shopping use case as an example and looking at the spectrum of the funnel, even within shopping, not everything was a great use case, and we had to pick and choose what would be more valuable to the users. And as you can imagine, bottom of the funnel conversion based use cases created 10x improvement for the user, because they didn't have to go back to their previous orders, find what they were looking for, and have to go through the order process. You could just say, Alexa, reordered eggs, and it would show up next day, right? So that just basically provided significant improvement in the experience, but also reduced the friction for the user to engage with this new technology. All right, so we're going to talk about some best practices. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are top of mind for me every time I think about conversational AI. Some of these might sound obvious, but the level of nuance and complexity when it comes to designing for a conversational AI experience, it goes beyond the obvious. For example, walking in a mile in the user's shoes. It's so important to understand the context of the user. On one hand, you could be designing for a smart device that is voice enabled versus, let's take a look at ChatGPT, that is a phone or a laptop based experience, and users are already used to using SMS chat functionality. Now, if that's the user context, for example, in the Alexa case, we used to have demo labs where people would pretend to be in a kitchen and they're multitasking. And at that point, Alexa is ping, would you like this deal on the shoes? Maybe not the right time, right? So making sure you understand the user context, what they are doing in a given moment, and then is this the right use case for the user? I think there's a lot there in terms of user study methodologies that you can dig into to be able to understand, are we choosing the right modality? Are we choosing the right use case for the users? Are they more likely to switch their behavior from the current way of doing things to today? And that would require some deep understanding of how users do things today. Another cool technique that we used to use at Alexa is a persona based approach. So we would just make up a persona for Alexa, saying in this product case, Alexa is a homework assistant for kids. Or in another situation, we would say Alexa is a babysitter while parents are doing the cooking. We're going to design a game and kids are going to get entertained, right? So on and so forth. So if you came up with a persona like Alexa is a nutrition assistant for the users, then understanding that expectation from users. If I were to hire a personal nutritionist, what would I expect from them? I would expect them to be able to give me some personalized recommendations, be able to answer questions that are specific to my needs, potentially dietary restrictions, etc., and give me fresh new ideas every time. And so that would be the expectation you would replicate in the nutrition assistant and make sure that the AI is able to support those needs. And you can just go on in terms of trying different personas, but that really helped all of us anchor into the user expectations and needs and be able to scope our MVP very effectively. When we started taking this approach for other projects like Gift Finder, for example, or news related projects, we felt like this approach helped us get to defining the core MVP in a very effective way. We talked about identifying and validating the use case. So if you've decided that nutrition assistant is the right case, one of our very popular projects was meal planning. It was one of our favorites. All the women in the team loved meal planning related projects, and so we all thought this was a great use case. And we decided to validate that. Is that really the right thing? And today, if you remember in September, ChatGPT announced that they are going to be able to take visual inputs from what's in your refrigerator and provide meal ideas. We were trying to address this many, many years ago with a very different modality, which is voice input. Alexa, I have tomatoes and potatoes in my fridge. What do you think I can cook, right? And validating that by putting that prototype in front of the user, by putting these scenarios in front of the user and saying, try and use it. Does it work? Does it work while you are in the kitchen trying to figure out dinner, while your dog is barking and your kids are asking for food, right? So bringing that context and validating those use cases. Going back to modality, is voice the right modality versus text versus maybe a screen-based? Many times we inferred that hands-free type of use cases were perfect matches for voice. So you say you're driving and you don't want to pull out your phone. You're going out for a run or a walk, for example. You're in the kitchen and multitasking and you don't want to use your hands. Those are the perfect cases for voice-based experiences. In other cases where you're browsing for different products, so you're doing research, maybe you want to lean back and sit back in your couch and just pull up your computer and do what you're doing, right? So thinking about, again, what's the right modality for the project that you're embarking on? Do you want to provide a rule-based experience or a very intuitive conversational experience? A rule-based experience would be what you will see in many scenarios today. Basically, a lot of companies are taking backend APIs from different providers and adding a simple chat interface. I think a couple of years ago, we saw a lot of that in Facebook, where people were building messenger-based chatbots, which were, here are 3 options, just click on the next one, right? You will see that in support chatbots on many websites as well. You may type whatever you feel like, but the chatbot will come back and say, here's an article to read, and that's all I have for you. So it restricts the user experience quite a bit, but at the same time minimizes the overhead on the technical side, on the design and product side, to be able to launch something and quickly test whether this is the right product. In case of going truly conversational in nature, it basically depends on your persona. So it's very suitable for something like Alexa or Google Assistant, which is positioned as your personal assistant. And so you should expect that users will come and ask anything and everything to the assistant, versus I'm just designing something as a customer support chat, and that would be very restrictive. And so rule based might make more sense in that case. Finally, I wanted to share another key learning, which is you could keep talking till the cows come home, but the moment you put a prototype in the room in front of leadership, in front of stakeholders, in front of users, it was worth 1,000 meetings. It will help us make a lot of progress very quickly because people were reacting to that prototype and understanding the nuances of voice, cognizant, as well as interactions, and then being able to decide very quickly whether we should go down this path or not. So highly recommend investing in prototyping your ideas even before you start coding anything.
So speaking of prototypes, let's take a quick dive into looking at the technical underpinnings and architectures behind chatbots, assistants. There really is sort of the pre-ChatGPT way of chatbots were designed versus this emergence of large language models. And a key thing to understand was that within the previous models, within systems like Alexa, Amazon Lex, Google Assistant, etc., they were still using AI, right? But they had different a concert of machine learning systems working together, where one system was classifying what the user said into which intent did they. Is this the start? Get my bill intent, or is this a technical support intent? There's a whole other set of systems deciding how to fulfill that intent. And then finally, another system generating a response, right? So these were complex engineering systems with a bunch of smaller models within them. As the designer, you have a lot more control over these systems of exactly what they're going to say, but you couldn't necessarily flexibly handle edge cases. It wasn't very fluid and natural. There's certainly no personalization to any great degree for different users unless you had thought through every personalization option ahead of time as the designer, right? Versus large language models, one system is doing all three of these pieces, right? But you have a lot less control of where you can plug into other systems. There's more variation though, right? There's more natural conversation, like you're talking to a person, and much better handling potentially of edge cases, of different edge cases. That's really, if you're looking at a monolithic, like just having one large language model, do all of chat, like most of what is happening underneath ChatGPT. Speaking of ChatGPT, it's worth diving into their new features. Their custom GPT builder from OpenAI. If you're familiar with it, it's got a wizard-like setup. It helps you set up your own chatbot very easily, and it gives you this UX that's a consistent user experience for all custom GPT users, right? You can control the widget, the name, but you can't really control a lot in UX. Like there's not a lot of design options here, right? The people who are designing or building these can include files to be a knowledge base for their particular GPT. And that's utilizing a new architecture that's very popular right now, retrieval augmented generation, where we're inserting the contents of that document into the prompt that's being used to query the LLM. It's really great that this tool is being made available and democratizing the ability to create these bots for everyone. You don't have to be a coder, right? But you are really restricted in terms of your design here, right? What if you wanted the bot to start the conversation? What if you were building an onboarding bot for your product, where you want to, ask the user a series of questions or guide the user through a series of steps before asking them if they had any questions. That's not something that's possible with the custom GPTs. You'll have to look at using their assistance API, which is a completely different system, right? So given the fact that there's this dichotomy between what's possible with our old natural language understanding with the high degree of control versus LLMs and the high degree of flexibility. What's emerging is this new model of this hybrid systems, right? Where you want that degree of control, you're allowed to use natural language understanding, classification of intent, but where you want more flexibility and edge case handling, you can use LLM systems. And that's where we see, especially like these custom GPTs or the assistance APIs being most useful is in the context of these systems. They're being used, being sort of plugged into these more complex systems. So in a lot of what we do with students is going through the process of creating, hey, where do we want to have that design flexibility, design control, and where do we want that flexibility? And how do we build an MVP in some of these emerging systems, like voice flow is one example. So that's a lot of what we do in our design and build conversational AI course on Reforge. It's our next cohort is coming up in January 2024. So we have the link to sign up there. We've also got some free learning coming up within December. So at my company, AI Career Boost, where there's a 1-hour webinar, mastering AI leadership for PMs and product leaders. So we've got the link there to sign up for that. We'll be delving deeper into some of the technical aspects like retrieval augmented generation. And we also have a free ebook, more on the design side. So a guide to creating a chatbot UX flow. What does that look like for conversational AI designers and PMs, as well as UX designers and founders.
This is very exciting. Thank you for sharing so many great insights as well as all the resources. I definitely going to sign up for the conversation design flow and maybe the webinar if my time allows. But there's a recording available, Polly, for the GNAI.
There will be. If you sign up at that link, the recording will be sent out afterwards. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And again, folks, when you subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find a link in the event details tab, we will include all of the links to access those materials. So the newsletter will be published the following Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So if you're a subscriber, you'll be able to get all those resources as well as replay of today's recording, so you don't miss anything. And this has been a really, really great mini lecture. I learned a lot about the differences between natural language understanding and when to use LLM, and also the best practices. And thank you, Rupa, for walking us through sort of an example with Amazon shopping. I do have a couple questions that I think are very top of my mind that I think our viewers will find a lot of value. But maybe we can start with sort of diving into, hey, if I'm a PM that I'm working on, a product feature, and I'm wondering, hey, I think the conversational UX will really help 10x, leading the improvement. How should they be thinking about how to get started? And is there a good framework to think about what are the use cases that would be great for this 10x chat interface versus, should every product have a chat, or how should they be making the decision? Like, would there be sort of a framework or mental model to think about that?
Yeah, I think the way I think of it, and we've presented it before, is this idea of how complex is the use case, and then how much guidance do you want to give them, right? Is this something where they come in with a mental model of like, there are 3 input parameters and I know the exact values of each of those, right? That might be something where it's easier to select a value and use traditional UX kind of paradigms, where something might take longer to explain, right? And I think it's also really knowing, is this like, where does this fit into the context of their broader tasks? Is this right at the beginning when they just sat down to their keyboard? Did they just switch to a tab? Are they halfway through something else? Right? All of these things really feed into, is this going to be something where the users really want more guardrails and like, I can only make, select between 3 options, or do they want and need that flexibility of being able to use language in its infinite array? And I think the basic thing is we're all learning where this is for our users. So depending on your use case, you're going to have to test it, right? You're going to have to get some prototypes in front of users to really know for sure.
I can share some additional examples as well. I think if you look at booking.com, they have invested heavily in a conversational AI chatbot experience. And I think the primary use case there is helping users put together a personalized itinerary. So, for example, if a user is looking for, I don't want to go to very touristy places in Italy, help me create an itinerary. Oh, by the way, I also have 2 kids. One of them is a toddler, one of them can walk, right? That becomes a complex query to what Polly was saying. And that's very hard to do in the traditional UX, where slicing and dicing all these options could take days for the user to keep filtering and looking for, versus just putting this query in a question format and boom, you have an itinerary, right? Another example, very recently, was working with a project team as well, and they had a lot of analytics on their product. It's a web-based product, and every user, they have very different set of personas looking at that data. So somebody's from marketing, someone's from operations, someone's from finance, and everyone wants to slice and dice that data differently. Now it's hard to keep expanding that UX UI with more and more filters and changing the UI so much that it becomes custom for each person. Rather than that, we came up with the idea that how about we create a chat interface right here and say, person A wants to come in and compare their data with the last month's data. But person B wants to say, at 6 p.m. every Friday, I want to check for the last Fridays how I've been doing, right? Completely different query, but the same set of data. That becomes another complex use case, right? And these are good examples of when you should start thinking of AI can run its magic in the back end to provide an awesome experience for the user. And then the interface is just a means to the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I like the sort of like sometimes you also don't know. So you have to like kind of like just test things out, but make hypothesis, right, about users' behavior. I think what conversational AI struck me as different from sort of the more rule-based AI is the context of how it's being used, right? Both in form of, particularly I think in form of like voice versus text, which we'll get into. How What are some of the top mistakes that you think you see teams making when they're like newbies and trying to like just jump onto the hype of like the shining object? Let's do a chat bot for everything. Since ChatGPT have made it so accessible for many teams to just like do it. Maybe leadership forced them to do it. So what are some quick like top mistakes that people can try
I think you've already listed all the top mistakes. My companies told me to do it, so I'm doing it. I remember Polly and I gave a talk recently at a very large organization, a tech org, where the teams were telling us that every product team has been asked to create a co-pilot for their product, right? Or the fact that, hey, I have this access to an API through Bard or OpenAI, whatever. Let's just go build a chatbot. Like, just the fact that you don't know why you're doing something and what value it adds for the user. I think those are the top mistakes. I'm sure Polly has more to add to this.
The big one, the way to push back on that, right, is to really be like, can we please identify the KPI we're improving, right? It's got to be, if we already have like an automated chatbot for customer service, but now we need an LLM one, what do we believe, right? That being friendlier is going to get answers more quick, more responsive, more quickly. What business metric is this moving up and to the right, right? So I think that's a nice way to kind of help diffuse that you're like, I can't run and launch a product if I don't know what our success criteria are going to be, right? So starting there, define success criteria. The other one, I see a lot of folks assuming that they're building a voice bot and that they can just take text for chat interfaces and just add a voice API and you're done. We absorb and speak, we listen and we speak much differently. We use completely different language than we do when we're reading, right? Smaller words. We can't scan back with our eyes. So we did a lot of work at Alexa to try to take longer form text meant for reading and translate it for audio, for example. So the design aspect of that gets overlooked a lot.
Absolutely. Let's talk about it. How does conversational design like differ from text versus voice?
Oh my God.
And does LLM change any of this? Like make it easier, different?
Makes it easier to make terrible interfaces.
That's a trigger for me. I can get started on this one all the time. I think I can summarize this. It's a long conversation and there's a lot of nuance there, but I don't want to mislead the audience here. We can summarize it with a few key areas to think about. One is you have to expect a big mental model shift. You cannot apply everything that you're doing in the traditional UX paradigm into conversational AI paradigm. And some key areas how it differs is that the user journey is very fluid, organic, non-linear. It's not click through, linear journeys where you just kind of, provide some affordances and the user just clicks on a very guided path. If you create a little window for input like ChatGPT does or other bots do, and users like, I'm going to type whatever comes to my mind, and you better be prepared for that, right? And that is a very, very open-ended user journey. So that's number one. Number two, I think a lot of designers are used to designing within the how do the canvas or the tools available are interaction paradigms, UI components, and then let's make magic out of it. And we do some amazing work there, but with conversational AI, you have to expand your horizons a little bit and say data, logic, ethics, a lot of these things come into play. And so you cannot ignore that. That is a core part of the user experience. And the third thing that comes to mind is understanding the technology. Now you could be a web designer and not know anything about web technology, and you can still build awesome experiences, but that doesn't apply with AI. You need to understand the technology limitations, the constraints, and working around that to still create a delightful user experience. And so at Alexa, my team and I, we used to spend a lot of time with our awesome PM partners, Eng partners, just to understand what can be done, what cannot be done. We used to even work very closely with the science team to understand the limitations of technology and then work backwards from there, saying maybe this is the way we guide the user to not be able to hit a road block or not hit a dead end, right? So those were some ways we navigated through this, but not investing in understanding the technology will limit you and not help you deliver your best. So these are top three, but there's a pretty longer list, and happy to answer questions on that later.
Absolutely. I think it's pretty unique in that regard, and how much of the tech drives the voice experience too. I mean, coming from, I knew that recently my parents visit. I know Pauline knew that, and they're coming from China. So they speak sort of the regional dialect in Chinese. And that's when you knew that the language model have not trained for like standard Chinese speaking, right? Like, so if you don't speak, you speak with an accent, it really, really messed up the sample.
Yeah.
Like the just like how bad the experience could be because it just doesn't understand you or doesn't capture it correctly, and it impacts that experience.
There's so many more variables that they introduce with adding voice. And so people are always like, oh, ChatGPT, it's so easy, and Alexa is so hard. Like there's background noise and accents and how far are you away from the speaker and words that sound the same, homonyms. Like there's a lot of complexity there.
Absolutely. So
I think there is one key area that everyone underestimates or overlooks, and this ties back to your first question, Shivi, which is what are some of the key mistakes, right? I think the fact that you're positioning your product as an AI-enabled product, which makes the user expect that this is a super intelligent product. And we're talking about very complex accents and language issues, but I have kids who speak English, right? Basic language. Imagine them showing up in front of Alexa, asking a random question about dinosaurs, and Alexa not knowing the answer. And they're like, Alexa, you're stupid. And boom, you've lost trust. That user is not coming back to that product anymore. So the tolerance of users with a smart system and their ability to forgive mistakes is very, very low. And this is something we overlook every single time. Is you're positioning this as an AI enabled product. Please do not build MVPs and say, let's just test a half baked product, because people are not coming back to something like this. The expectation is this is AI. This got to be super smart and intelligent, right?
yeah, we get so many of that, right? I feel like it's just like the hype and the reality, and or like the magic.
Yeah.
Sometimes the pendulum swings. Like some prompts you fit into the LM, you get like amazing result, and some you're just like, really?
Yeah.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's definitely that expectation gap that needs to be managed, especially, I guess, for end users who are not days in and day out with AI like many of us do. Two of you both talked about the importance of being able to quickly prototype different ideas to test if things work, if it's the right use case, are users using it the expected way or the unexpected way. What are some, best practice for like quickly the
Mhm.
speed, I guess, is the key here to be able to prototype that so that either you push back to your leadership or, oh, where to double down.
If your paradigm does fit into something like building with the custom GPT builder, right? There are some concerns around the data security there, so I would be careful about putting any kind of PII as part of the knowledge base there. But that can be a really great way to test out, like, hey, so OpenAI has decided this is how chatbots will look. If that is, we want something that looks like ChatGPT but uses our data. That's a really nice, quick, easy way to get started, right? If you're looking for something with a little more control, like we talked about those hybrid systems, there's tools like Voice Flow. I think there's another one called chatbotbuilder.ai. There's a myriad of tools out there, but those are two I'm familiar with that are make it really easy, kind of drag and drop to kind of create a conversational flow, decide where you want to integrate with LLM responses, and easily get that out on a website or even integrate it into an existing site to get feedback. And those are really great, cheap, easy tools to get started with as well. In the NLU space, and there's still good reason to have a highly curated, strictly designed flow. There's tools like Amazon's Lex, Google's Dialogflow, where you can design out every step of the conversation. And those two have like WYSIWYG editors that you can play with as well. So there's lots of tools, and depending on your use case, which one will be the right one.
Absolutely. And I just add to this, Shivi, maybe try and answer your question slightly differently. I don't think we should let the lack of tools or the perfection of these tools get in the way of putting things in front of people. So, for a recent chatbot project I worked on for a food delivery app, we put some wireframes in front of users and got feedback on would they use this, how do they rate it in terms of usability, delight, etc. And we tested our wireframes. These were simple, low fidelity wireframes, not even a working prototype. And we got some very significant feedback to even validate the use case, make a decision between the modalities we were earlier thinking about voice, and then we made a pivot to text and chatbot based version. We did this process 4 times in a row. Every 3 weeks, we would show back to a different set of users after iterating from the previous feedback. When we started, our prototype rating was about 1.2 out of 5. By the time we finished the process 4 times over, we hit 4.6 out of 5. And that's when the team felt like we're ready to start coding. And so this helped us pivot so many times, narrow down our use cases, iterate on the model, and make sure that we are giving the user the right experience. And now our confidence level and the reaction, the product is currently in beta, and the reaction is so much more positive than we had when we had originally started. And all of that without writing a single line of code and not doing any complex designs or prototypes, just pure wireframes, right? So don't let complexity around tools or access to tools stop
Yeah.
you from being able to test and iterate early on. You'll save a lot of resources, time, and bandwidth later on by prototyping and testing early.
The easiest, always try to simplify the easiest voice prototypes. Literally, for Alexa, people would have like a person standing behind a sheet in sort of Wizard of Oz style. They had an entire kitchen lab where people are trying to do things in the kitchen and then being like, I don't know, Alexa says this,
Absolutely. I love the Wizard of the Yachts smoke test, or
Yeah.
that really helps
Early
getting more
validation.
insight and understanding and exposing more problem, and do it. I like to do it with like the end users too, so that like, oh, you thought that they will ask the prompt this way, or you will ask this set of question, but actually, nope, they think very differently from you.
Mhm.
Um, so So a big part of, I guess, doing some sort of chat bot is what we call the like sort of the evaluation criteria, right? Like, how do you know what a good conversation would look like? And then, in many ways, a good conversation would look like in real life. For example, in a lot of LinkedIn's context, where we're trying to build this coach that help people get better jobs, so understand if they can take better jobs, is a conversation with a career coach and a certified one, or your mentor, is going to be so different from a conversation you might have with an AI, right? Like the level of depth or the type of conversation. So how do you define what good look like? I guess depending on your circumstances, and then how do you evaluate them? What are some of the dimensions or criteria that you look at?
I don't think there's a silver bullet here. I think depending on, again, going back to the example I just made, when we started off our prototype, we didn't know, we thought what we were presenting to the user was pretty awesome. And then the feedback we got was, but I wouldn't ask this question this way. Or if I ask this question, this is what I would expect. I don't think I would interact with this component like this, right? So iteration based on user feedback will get you to good. But it's hard to say that, hey, if had there are very foundational components to a good conversational experience, and you can build each of those components and say we checked all the boxes, we've got multi-turn, we've got soft landings, we've got disambiguation, we've got all these pieces, and still may not be a good experience. And so I would recommend that not to start with I want to do everything and maximize all the components, but go back again to your users and understand what good means for them, and come up with some kind of a way to measure, quantify what good means, so that you can move the needle in that direction. Polly, what do you think?
Yeah, it's the ultimate measure is, of course, if it moves your business and product metrics in the right direction, right? But that's very hard to test early on or while you're developing it. That kind of only shows up at A/B testing time, right, when you're launching it. And so looking for proxies for, developing a hypothesis of the proxies for that user feedback, I think is a key PM skill early on. When we were working with generative AI, we often found that we had like a constellation of metrics we were trying to optimize for, and often like, oh, it got slightly more accurate, but now it's slightly less friendly. Like we would have this like a whole set around, the accuracy and consistency of the answers that's much more like, familiar from the data science technical side. We'd have this like, is this consistent with the personality and the brand and the warmth, or the kind of those more softer kind of pieces that we were trying to evaluate. And then there's around brand, bias, and making sure that there's no brand damaging answers, safety of your users, as well. So we would have to keep track of all of those for all the different variations. And we would be measuring multiple models at a time, trying to see, hey, how can we find the one that optimizes best for that entire constellation of metrics? And trying to get those each, deciding what's the baseline for each of these to actually put this in front of users, required a lot of alignment, a lot of different stakeholders around what do we all agree is right. So those are just some key PM skills, I think, in this emerging paradigm, is getting everyone on the same page in a complex situation. This is not going to be, hey, we've got one metric. When we hit 80%, it's go time. We're going to have to agree on some trade-offs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I can add another quick example here, Shivi, just to close it out. I think, say your team is looking to launch a customer support chatbot, right? And the goal is to reduce the cost of customer support, human cost of the customer support. The user shows up on your chatbot, and for every answer, the chatbot says, "Here are a few links," and then has a feedback loop saying, "Would you rate my service?" Right? Now, there's no multi-turn, there's no true conversation. Users not able to type whatever they feel like, but they do get the information they're looking for. The relevance is high. So whatever they type, they get relevant content. And they're rating the product high, right? The product experience high. That's a good chatbot. It may not meet all the requirements of a true conversational AI experience, but it meets the criteria for the business to invest in it, and the user feels like they get what they want. So again, there's no silver bullet or a framework, but you need to contextualize it in terms of your use case, the success metrics, and what value you're delivering to the user.
Yeah, I like how you calibrate sort of success based on the actual context of the usage, and then based on user feedback, like mapping that with the user expectation. I think it's like resetting, how high or whether it gets things done, or is it truly a chat bot. I like the usage of a constellation of metrics so that you don't lose sight of like different dimension. I think, Polly, you mentioned a little bit about sort of brand voice, like ensuring safety and things like that. I wanted to just ask one more question to close out before we wrap up today's masterclass on this conversational AI, is the notion around risks. And I wanted to ask it in a couple of different ways. I think first is that we heard about, hey, sometimes LN hallucinate and and then it's unpredictable, so it's hard to like know when it hallucinate, when it does not. So how do we mitigate that? And then the second thing I think is, how do you simulate risks like safety or like edge cases? People ask weird stuff. Like, how do you know what will be like the weird stuff that people will try, right? Is that something to concern, or just as long as you put that banner and say, hey, we don't know everything and AI could hallucinate, don't trust everything AI said, is that enough? Like, how do you manage risks?
Right. It's another huge topic. I think this is one of the areas that PMs, really need to brush up on their skills for AI, because the truth is there's going to be unanticipated inputs. That's the world we live in, right? And you can do a lot of work of, trying to think of all the possible negative cases. You could never produce a single thing if you spend all your time in mitigation mode for every potential roadblock that could come up. And while a lot of folks try to do that up front, it's always the case that, the day before launch, a director, VP, CEO is going to come to you and say, oh, last night I had a nightmare that such and such happened, this weird edge case. And what are we doing about that? Right. So I think I always recommend maintaining like a risk register and getting really adept at like keeping the visibility high between technical stakeholders and leadership, so everyone can bring the risks. They have a central place we can bring it. We can prioritize them. We can say, here's the ones we agree are above the line and we have to worry about these. Here's the ones that we can mitigate after launch. We can actually see if they ever materialize. What is the real likelihood? Because that's the other uncertainty, right? Is there's lots of risks that are come up. How likely are they and how severe they are often unknowns, right? So you're like risk squared, really, right? So it's really gaining the confidence of people that like, hey, what data can we gather to really understand how bad these things might be? And then what does happen if they materialize is the other piece, right? How quickly could we take an answer down? How quickly could we replace something that's going wrong and mitigate the harm to users, right? So those two pieces, I think, as long as you've got that on an ongoing basis, even once the system is live, really help gain the confidence of your stakeholders and of your users.
Anything to add from you, Rupa?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
I like that because, inherently risk is important, and especially the brand perception, right? To a lot of the bigger brands, the companies that we're working with. But then like, it's not necessarily the most sort of positive, like it's not the biggest lever, right? You're not going to like hit your metrics, or maybe not the guardrail metrics if you spend too much time like trying to brainstorm all the potential risks. So finding that right balance of like, how do you spend your time doing high leverage activities, but also protecting yourself from the downside of potential perceived risks or the risk of expectation gaps. That could be another one. I think sort of hidden, right? Like people might have a high expectation on what this tool can do, but then being disappointed. So yeah, I think those are really, really good learnings. Thank you so much, Polly and Rupa. I think this has been a really, really great session. And again, folks, if you subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find the link in the event details tab, you'll receive recap of key takeaways from today's event, as well as all the great freebies, the slides, free webinars and upcoming courses, all within the newsletter that we'll send out on Wednesday. So make sure you subscribe to that. And thank you so much, Polly and Rupa, for spending time with us. Any sort of 10-second parting advice or 30-second parting advice for the audience?
Get out there fast. Obviously, things are moving quickly,
Yes.
but a last call to always keep in mind these the ethical considerations and responsible AI front and center. I think we're entering a time of massive innovation, but it behooves us all to think about how we're affecting even the most vulnerable of our users at all times.
Yeah, I think more than the opportunity, we have a responsibility to make sure we're doing right by our users, we're doing right by society. And so think of it as a responsibility. Don't stand on the sidelines, and let's just jump in and shape this together. This is such an exciting space. I've been working in emerging tech for 20 years now, and I have never been so excited about what we're doing right now. But we also have huge responsibility on our shoulders. So thank you, Shivi. It was such a pleasure chatting with you today. Really appreciate you having us here today.
No,
For
thank you
sure.
so much. I'm sure the whole community is very appreciative of you. And yeah, thank you so much. Make sure, folks, to check out the newsletter come out on Wednesday so that we can continue the learning. If you have any question, you can leave them in the chat or reach out. We'll get Polly and Rupa to answer them as well. So thank you so much again. And I'm glad that you all enjoy today's learning and hope to see you next time. All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.